There's a common problem I see a lot of developers struggle with when they first start learning React, and that's how to synchronize two different states when one state kind of depends on another state. So what I'll see a lot of new developers do is try to implement something like the following. So there's a list of people, their ages, and we have some input where when we change this, we want it to filter this list. So right now it's not doing that. Now they may walk into this component and recognize, okay, we have set filter age here. So after that, well, let's get the filtered people. So we're going to take the people, which is just some data. We're going to filter it. Each person, we'll filter it by their age if their age is greater than the filter age. And then they have this filter people and they want to use it down here, but the problem is that was created within this scope and we need it outside of here. So then they maybe reach for another state. They say, okay, well, we're going to have filtered people and we'll have set filtered people. We'll initialize that to the people array. And once we set it, or rather once we derive it, we want to set it. So we're going to say set filtered people age. Perfect. So now they go into their app and they start testing and they say, huh, that's weird. It didn't filter like I expected. Oh, well, now it did. But if I go back, everything is gone. I go back again, and it refiltered. After a while messing with this, they may start to recognize it's actually a delayed filtering. It's always using the input previously typed, not the one currently typed as desired. The reason for this is actually baked into the design of React. So React, when you set a state, it is not going to reflect that update until the next render. The reason for that is that your UI is always a function of your state. And basically React can do all sorts of smart diffing and all sorts of optimizations under the hood because it can basically build this virtual DOM and then compare it to the previous one and only update the things that need to be updated. So it's very much by design that when you set something, it doesn't actually show up until later. Okay, so how do we synchronize these two states? Well, a lot of times what developers will reach for next is a little hook called useEffect. So they probably have seen useEffect or used it before and recognized, okay, with useEffect, I can have a dependency array and say that I want to only run some code, such as the following, whenever something in my dependency array changes. And here we're just using the filter age. So let's see if that works. We'll save and then we'll start typing and look, it did actually work, which is great. So they've solved the problem, but this isn't the best solution. And the reason is when you enter this input, you're going to cause set filter age to run, which will cause this component to update. At that point, filter age is now different, so useEffect will rerun. And then this will run and set filter people will run. And then that causes a new render. So we actually are having two renders run. We're having an effect go off, and it's just kind of messy. And honestly, this doesn't even look that great. You have several different hooks, or you have a useEffect, and you have two sets and everything going on. So there's a little bit easier way to do this when we're trying to derive one value from a state, and that's simply to just derive it. So if we take that const filter people, and we just remove this effect and remove this state, now we don't need to import it. We get the exact same behavior and less re-renders actually. This is only going to re-render every single time we click this, which is great. That's exactly what we wanted. Now, a lot of times I would actually just put this down here with a map since you can chain these different array functions, but there may be a legitimate reason to kind of keep it above, code cleanliness, or even you're running a lot of different stuff. And if that's the case, and if you're recognizing that this is a really expensive operation, you can reach for another hook called useMemo. UseMemo is a little bit like useEffect, but for synchronous work. At least that's how I think of it. The reason it's similar is because it also has a dependency array. So in that dependency array, we can say filter age. And we'll recognize that this works immediately again, which is great. So useMemo is using a method, a computer science method called memoization. And what that means is if the argument that it receives is the same as the previous argument it receives, it's just going to return whatever previous value. So you don't want to run any side effects in here. That's what useEffect is for. So if you were fetching some data or writing to a database or changing anything that would be side effects related, you don't actually want to run this. You only want to run pure functions, which means if you give the same argument of filter age, you're always going to get the same result, which is exactly what's happening here. If people were changing, if it wasn't a static value, we'd want to put that in here too. Now in this case, use memo is not necessary because the only time this component is re-rendering is if we actually type in here. But there may be legitimate reasons where this component is getting rendered all the time, or you have a really big list and you really don't want to rerun this operation, this filter operation, because it's expensive every time. That's when you want to use memo, but you really should profile first and check that out to make sure that it really is a bottleneck or it really is slowing you down before you reach for use memo. So in more cases than not, taking that complicated double state and use effect kind of thing just gets turned into a one-liner where you just derive the value from the state, and that's all you need.